They told you to open up, to speak your truth, to be authentic. Because vulnerability is the new virtue. Because transparency builds connection. Because showing your scars makes you relatable. And on the surface, it all sounds noble. It sounds honest. It sounds human. But Machiavelli would sit in the corner of the room, arms folded, silent, watching you hand over the blueprints of your mind to people who haven't earned it. And he'd quietly shake his head, not out of disdain, but out of recognition, because he's seen it before. Empires collapsing from open mouths, kings dethroned by shared secrets, men destroyed not by enemies, but by what they disclosed too freely. He understood something this modern age has forgotten. When you become easy to read, you become easy to manipulate. Every time you explain yourself, every time you reveal your inner battles, every time you confess your intentions, you're not just expressing, you're surrendering. You think you're building trust. They're drafting their attack. You think you're bonding. They're bookmarking your weaknesses. And here's the brutal truth. In a world driven by self-interest, your sincerity isn't always honored. It's harvested. It's monetized. It's weaponized. Your story becomes their strategy. Your honesty becomes their leverage. Machiavelli once wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." What he meant was this: people don't always lie to deceive. They lie to control. They promise to disarm you. And once you've opened the gates, they don't knock anymore. They walk straight in. You walk around with your heart on your sleeve, thinking you're being noble, but in their eyes, you're just easy to study, easy to shape, easy to break. Because in this world, you're not rewarded for being easy to understand. You're rewarded for being hard to predict. And if you're still out there believing that everyone deserves to know the real you, then you're not walking through life like a strategist. You're walking like a sacrifice. This game isn't about being loved by everyone. It's about knowing who deserves access. Not everyone should be allowed to walk through your soul like it's a public museum, because the more familiar they become, the easier it is to turn your truths into tools against you. That's why today, you're going to learn the 7 secrets you must never reveal. Not because you're afraid, but because you've evolved. Because you've seen what happens when you give too much, too soon, to the wrong people. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming precise. This isn't about deception. It's about defense. If you're on the path to becoming a man who cannot be shaken, if you're done bleeding for people who never had the hands to hold your depth, then this is your silent turning point. Let this message be the beginning of your quiet transformation. And if something inside you feels like it's waking up, if you recognize yourself in these words, then do something most men never do. Make a vow, not to me, but to yourself, that from this moment on, you will never again explain your soul to those who came only to dissect it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Not to be seen, but to remind yourself that this time, you're not giving your truth away for free. You're building silence like a fortress. And inside that silence, you're reclaiming your power. They'll tell you to speak your goals out loud, to manifest your vision, to declare what you want so the universe can respond. But here's the harsh reality Machiavelli understood. Long before vision boards and affirmations, the moment people know your destination, they start designing detours. Not because they're evil, but because ambition is never neutral. To the insecure, it's a threat. To the lazy, it's a mirror. To the jealous, it's an insult. When you say, "I want to be promoted," you think you've planted a flag, but in their minds, you've exposed a target. Now they know exactly where to aim their resistance. When you say, "I'm starting something of my own," they don't hear courage, they hear competition. And even your friends begin to ask invasive questions, not to support you, but to measure you, to map your trajectory. Because the moment your intentions are public, so are your vulnerabilities. Machiavelli once said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. A few experience what you really are. And the ones who do, they either align with your fire, or they start quietly pouring water on it." You think you're being bold by stating your plan, but you're giving away your coordinates. You're letting the opposition build roadblocks before you even leave the driveway. So how do the most dangerous men move? Silently. They don't say, "I'm going for the throne." They say, "I'm just observing." They don't say, "I'm walking away." They say, "I'm exploring." And while everyone thinks you're still on square one, you've already crossed half the board. Because you don't need to announce power to possess it. You move like fog, present, but hard to grasp, unseen until it's too late, until checkmate arrives. And no one remembers when the first move happened. There's a reason history remembers the loud men as martyrs and the silent ones as rulers, because real power doesn't shout. It watches, it listens, it strikes without permission. You want to be free. Then guard your direction. Don't speak it. Shape it. Even your closest allies don't need the full picture, not because they're enemies, but because loose lips don't just sink ships. They sink destinies. And here's the part no one warns you about. Even those who love you can accidentally leak your vision to the wrong ears. A careless comment, a proud mention, a subtle nod, and suddenly, the people who were never meant to know your next move are now building strategies against it. This isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. It's self-preservation. You don't need to lie. You just need to withhold. Say less. Move smarter. Let your execution speak in volumes. Your mouth never uttered. And when they finally see what you've built, when they realize you were always 10 steps ahead, it'll be too late to stop you. Because while they were busy predicting your next sentence, you were rewriting the whole play. So the next time someone asks, "What are you working on?" Smile, nod, say, "I'm figuring things out." Because the man who hides his map is the only one who arrives without resistance. You want to be unstoppable? Then, master the art of silent momentum. Let them underestimate, let them assume, and while they guess, you grow. They say, be vulnerable, be real, speak from the heart, but they don't tell you what happens next. They don't say that most people aren't listening to connect, they're listening to collect. Because in the wrong room, your honesty doesn't heal, it hands out weapons. You say, "I overthink everything." They hear, "He's easy to destabilize." You say, "I'm afraid of being abandoned." They hear, "I can control him with silence." You open your soul, and they study the cracks, not to fill them, but to figure out how to split you open later. Machiavelli never told you to be emotionless. He told you to be unreadable, because power doesn't lie in how deeply you feel. It lies in how little they can read those feelings. He knew that once someone sees your bruise, it's only a matter of time before they press it. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, when the dynamic shifts, when their respect fades, when your presence becomes inconvenient, and then, that moment when you said, "I hate being ignored," becomes the exact silence they weaponize. That night you confessed, "I don't feel enough," becomes the joke. They'll whisper, when your back is turned, "You thought you were building closeness," but what you built was leverage in their hands. You want to cry where no one can see you. You want to fall apart. Do it behind closed doors, because the moment you bleed emotionally in front of someone who hasn't earned your trust, you turn pain into currency, and they will spend it. This isn't about being cold, it's about being sovereign. You're allowed to feel everything, but you owe no one access to that inner battlefield. Control your expressions, control your tempo, control your silence, because the world is not gentle with those who reveal their wounds too quickly. And here's the irony. Most people won't praise your emotional restraint, but they will respect it, quietly, even fear it, because a man who doesn't flinch, doesn't fold, doesn't overshare, becomes a mystery. And mystery is power. Machiavelli said, "A ruler must learn to act as both beast and man," which means, be soft when necessary, but never soft to the point of becoming predictable. So what does that look like in real life? It looks like walking into the room calm, even when your chest is a thunderstorm. It looks like speaking with composure, even when betrayal is burning behind your teeth. It looks like smiling politely, even even when everything inside you wants to shatter, not because you're fake, but because your pain is not their playground and your heart is not a public exhibit. You want real safety. Then, be your own sanctuary. You want true intimacy. Then wait for the one who proves they can handle the truth, without turning it into a tactic. Because a man who cries in front of everyone is not empowered. He's exposed, and eventually, he's managed. But a man who bleeds in silence, who rebuilds in solitude, who speaks only when the storm has passed, that man carries a weight most of the world isn't built to handle. And maybe that's the point. In a world driven by perception, loyalty is not always a virtue. Sometimes, it's a weakness. You think you're being transparent when you say, "This is who I trust. This is my circle. This is where I stand." But what you're actually doing is drawing a map, because once people know your alliances, they don't need to target you directly. They just follow the lines. They follow your dependencies. They go after the ones you listen to, the ones you protect, the ones you'd go to war for. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He once wrote, "It is double pleasure to deceive the deceiver, not because it's cruel, but because in strategy, the greatest victories are often indirect. You don't strike the king. You poison the well he drinks from. You discredit the voice he listens to at night. You corrupt the bridge he crosses every morning. Because when your enemy knows who you trust, they no longer need to confront you. They just make your network bleed slowly, until your strength collapses from the inside. This is how kingdoms fall, not from invasion, but from infiltration. You say, "He's my closest friend." They say, "Good, let's make him doubt you." You say, "I follow her advice." They say, "Perfect, let's discredit her influence." And now, without ever touching you directly, they've weakened the entire structure you built your judgment on. That's why Machiavelli didn't preach coldness. He preached unpredictability. In public, you smile with everyone. You praise no one too loudly. You remain neutral in every conversation. And you keep your real alliances invisible. Not because you're ashamed, but because they're sacred. Because what's visible is vulnerable. The ones who truly matter to you, you keep them off stage. You don't post them. You don't quote them. You don't mention their names when it counts. Because when your power becomes untraceable, so does your weakness. And here's what most people never understand. You don't need to declare who you're with to move with power. In fact, the most powerful men in history were often the ones no one could place, no one could define, no one could label. Because the moment they label you, they begin designing resistance. They begin recruiting opposition. They begin weaponizing your allegiance to limit your movement. But when they don't know who you serve, who influences you, who you'd protect, you become a ghost in the system, an anomaly in their strategy, a variable they can't calculate. That's the art. That's how you walk into boardrooms, courtrooms, and battlegrounds with the presence of a man who can't be played, not because you're detached, but because you're disciplined. So when they ask, "Who do you admire?" you say, "I value different perspectives." When they ask, "Whose side are you on?" you say, "I'm still watching how things unfold." When they press, "Who influences your thinking?" you smile and say, "I like to listen to everyone, follow no one." These aren't evasions, they're shields. Because the moment they know who you die for, they'll test how far you're willing to bleed. But when they don't know who owns your loyalty, they don't know what move will cost you. And that is the most terrifying kind of man to confront. Not the loud soldier, but the silent strategist, the one who moves with unknown allegiance, and therefore, unpredictable force. They'll ask you, what drives you? What's your why? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And it sounds harmless, like a conversation between friends, like someone's just trying to understand you better. But it's not a question, it's a scan, a subtle probe for your internal wiring. Because once they know what fuels you, they know how to redirect you. Say your fire is validation. They'll control you with silence. Say it's legacy, they'll offer applause in all the wrong places. So you chase prestige over purpose. Say it's to make your father proud. They'll drop guilt like breadcrumbs and lead you wherever they want. What you thought was intimacy was intel collection, and here's the cold truth. The one who knows what moves you can move you. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago. The ends justify the means. But what most people miss is that he wasn't glorifying manipulation. He was exposing it. He understood something ruthless. People don't need to stop you. They just need to reroute you. Quietly, incrementally, until you wake up one day, working for their dreams, under the illusion it's still your own. That's how control works. Not through violence, but through narrative, through influence that dresses up as admiration. They won't cage you. They'll flatter you into building your own, and it'll feel good, right up until you realize you've built a staircase to nowhere. You're exhausted, not from climbing, but from climbing the wrong mountain. So what do? You stay vague. You stay boring. You say, I'm just exploring. I'm curious. I like building things. And they nod, underestimating you, thinking you're drifting, while in reality, you're sharpening. You're tunneling. You're moving with such precision that no one even sees the pattern you're following. Because when they can't define your fire, they can't fake the fuel. They can't offer you false rewards. They can't bait you into battles that don't matter. They can't slow you down. By distracting your hunger, your mission should be your best-kept secret. Not out of fear, but out of strategy, because power isn't about declaring purpose. It's about delivering results that no one saw coming. Let them think you're casual. Let them assume you're unfocused. Let them mock your quiet. And while they talk, you build, you refine, you evolve, until one day, the world stands in awe at something they never predicted because you never explained it. That's how empires rise, not with announcements, but with unseen architecture. So the next time someone asks, what really motivates you? Pause, smile, say, I'm just following what feels real, and let them believe it. Because the man who never reveals his engine is the man they can never slow down. You want to be unstoppable, then stop giving people the coordinates to your core. Your fire was never meant for the crowd. It was meant to be protected, fed in silence, and unleashed, only when it's too late to contain. In a perfect world, telling people what offends you would earn you respect. Honesty would build boundaries. Clarity would equal safety. But this isn't a perfect world. It's a psychological jungle. And in this jungle, predators don't hunt strength. They hunt reaction. The moment you say, I can't stand being ignored, someone, somewhere, will test that silence. Not by accident, but by design. You say, I hate liars, and someone will lie to your face, just to watch the fire in your eyes, not to hurt you, but to move you, to see how fast you burn, because the more emotionally precise you are, the easier you are to control. They don't need to break you. They just need to press repeat. On the things that bother you, you think it's coincidence. That pattern of small annoyances, it's not, it's a strategy. They're not trying to destroy you with one blow. They're leaking irritation into your life, not with force, but with precision. Not to wound, but to shift your center of gravity. That's how control works. Subtle, strategic, slow. Machiavelli warned us. A prince must learn to act as both beast and man. Why? Because appearance must remain human, but the core must be untouchable. Your disgust is data. Your hate is leverage. And the second you let people know what disgusts you, you give them a button. And even the kindest people will be tempted to press it, not out of malice, but because your reaction gives them power. Hatred doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you predictable. That's the fatal flaw. Not your weakness, but your willingness to display it. You say, I could never forgive betrayal. Now you've built a map for someone who wants to push you toward collapse. You name your enemies. You make them celebrities in your emotional ecosystem. That's why the most powerful men in the room are the ones you can't tell if they're angry or just thinking. You don't know what gets under their skin because nothing shows, and that's what makes them terrifying. So what do? You respond with neutrality, not coldness, not rage, just stillness. They ask, what kind of people disgust you? You say, people are complex. They push. Surely you hate something. You smile. I try not to live in judgment, because when you stop giving them targets, they start shooting blanks. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them dance in the fog of your indifference. Because the man who rants, who names, who lets hatred lead, is easy to manipulate. But the man who absorbs insult without expression, who lets discomfort pass through him like smoke, becomes unreadable, and unreadable means unplayable. Here's the final truth. Hatred pulls you out of position. It makes you loud when you should be quiet, reactive when you should be surgical, emotional when you should be invisible. So never let them see what rattles you, because once they know, they'll rattle it every time they feel small. But if you keep that space sacred, if you move like nothing penetrates, then they stop asking what breaks you and start fearing what you might break instead. Most people think boundaries are built through declaration. They say things like, I'd never walk away from this. I'd do anything for her. This means everything to me. They believe stating their loyalty makes them strong. But in the world of power, that's exactly what makes you exploitable. Because the more clearly you show what you're unwilling to lose, the easier it is to trap you with it. Tell them, I could never leave this job. And suddenly, your hours stretch. Your respect shrinks, but your paycheck stays the same. Tell them, I'll love her no matter what. And one day, she'll offer you half her soul, knowing you'll stay and beg for the other half. Because attachment is leverage, and leverage reshapes behavior, quietly, ruthlessly, permanently. You won't even notice how many boundaries you crossed, just to keep what you swore you'd never lose. And one day, you'll wake up inside a cage you helped build, with your own promises. That's why Machiavelli taught rulers never to appear too attached to anything, to anyone, to any outcome. Not because detachment is strength, but because predictability is weakness. When people believe you'll stay no matter how they treat you, they stop adjusting, they stop performing, they stop respecting. Familiarity becomes entitlement, and entitlement becomes erosion. Erosion not just of love or status, but of self-worth. They won't ask for the sacrifice directly. They'll just chip away at everything around it, until the only thing left to give up is you. And here's the deeper trap. They'll make you believe your sacrifice is noble. They'll applaud it, celebrate it, reward you with just enough affection to keep you bleeding for a cause that no longer feeds your soul. That's not loyalty. That's manipulation through illusion. So what do? You stop declaring your limits. You don't say, I'll never walk away. You say, I go where I'm respected. You don't say, she's everything to me. You say, I give what's earned. Let people feel the edge, not as a threat, but as a presence, a quiet reminder that your dignity is not up for negotiation. Because here's the paradox. The man who appears willing to walk away from anything is often the one no one dares push that far. You become untouchable, not by being rigid, but by being unreadable. They won't know where your line is, so they'll tread carefully. They won't know how far they can push, so they'll pull themselves back. And if one day they do cross the line, you don't raise your voice. You don't plead. You don't explain. You vanish, not to punish them, but to prove something deeper, that your presence was a privilege, not a guarantee. There's a myth in the modern world. That sacrifice is always noble, that bleeding without boundaries makes you virtuous. But Machiavelli would ask, who benefits when you keep bleeding? For people who no longer deserve your pulse. That's the question. That's the shift. So never let them know what you're willing to give up, because once they know what you die for, they'll start making you choose between that and your self-respect. And the man who reveals that line will one day be forced to cross it, just to keep the illusion alive. Now you know, not what to say, but what never to say, not because you're scared, but because you're awake, because somewhere along the way, you realize that being understood is not the same as being respected. You stopped chasing connection. At the cost of sovereignty, you stopped performing intimacy, just to feel momentarily seen. You've stepped into a new presence, a new posture. You don't explain yourself anymore. You don't narrate your life in real time. You don't hand out maps to people who only want shortcuts to your core. Machiavelli didn't preach silence as submission. He revealed it as dominance, because silence isn't empty. It's loaded. It creates pressure. It generates questions. It makes people talk too much, reveal too much, project too much, while you remain still. And in a world addicted to noise, the man who says nothing becomes the man they obsess over. They try to define you, but your silence keeps shifting shape. They try to measure you, but your calm is bottomless. They try to provoke you, but your fire doesn't dance on demand. You walk into rooms now, not looking for approval, but watching who adjusts when you arrive. Your stillness speaks louder than any speech you could give, because people fear what they can't predict, and they respect what they can't access. This is what Machiavelli meant when he spoke of wearing the appearance of virtue, without becoming its prisoner, not to deceive, but to defend, not to manipulate, but to master your narrative, master your access points, master the frequency at which your truth is shared. And when you do, you reclaim control, not just over how people see you, but over what they think they're entitled to know, because the man who closes the gates of his soul doesn't isolate himself. He secures the kingdom. So now the real question is this: will you go back? Will you keep bleeding every time someone asks what's going on inside your head? Or will you move forward as the unreadable man, unshakable, uncapturable, untouchable? If this message awakens something in you, if you feel that quiet shift in your chest, that steel beginning to form in your spine, then make it known, not with a shout, but with a choice, with distance, with discipline, with presence. And if you're already walking this path, in silence, in solitude, in strength, leave a comment below, not for attention, but as a vow, a private declaration that you're done leaking power to people who never earned your truth. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, not to be seen, but to remind yourself you are no longer explainable. You are no longer accessible on demand. You are no longer reacting for free. You are the man they can't map, the storm they didn't see coming, the silence. That changes everything.